Hello, and welcome to the Merri-Cast, the show that puts you on the fast track to business confidence. My guest this week is Kelly Gilmour-Grassam. Like me, Kelly had a passion for writing from an early age, but rather than go straight into a job working for others, she decided to set up her own business at the age of 21. And, as it all seemed to be going well, she just kept on going. By the time I first met her, and I have to say it feels like ages ago now, she'd just been crowned Freelancer of the Year at an awards do. Now, with her business nearly 10 years old, she's since gone on to build, manage and motivate a successful team around her. So, how did Kelly do it all? Well, many people have a career first and then decide to set up on their own. But as we hear, Kelly was bolder than most.
So I actually hadn't had much of a career before I got started with making new content. To give you a bit of a background, like growing up, I was always writing in some capacity, whether that was writing a journal, writing short stories, writing my essays at school. And as time went on, I found that I'd often be that person at school that other people came to and asked to check their essays and proofread their work. So I guess I always had a passion for writing, and I had a feeling that I was quite good at it just from, feedback I got at school and from my peers. And at the time when I was sort of I was at university, I was studying history, and I was wanting to go traveling after university, and I was on all the student job websites. I had 2 waitressing jobs, and I was just trying to earn as much money as I could to go traveling after uni as I could. And that sort of led me into sort of freelance writing, because there was a lot of student jobs at the time that were companies looking to create a lot of content without spending a lot of money, looking for students to help them on that journey. So one of my first freelancing gigs was EasyJet and low cost holidays, because they wanted student writers to write their, the pages you'll have. It's like 2-star holiday to Mallorca, 3-star holiday to Mallorca, 5-star holiday, back before there was AI tools or other ways to get around that sort of, high volume sort of churn content. So that was kind of how I got my foot in the door, really. And I guess that the next couple of years really for me was doing a bit of freelancing, finding my feet, and actually getting me to a point where I then had the confidence coming back from traveling, and then looking to start my career to go, oh, actually, maybe this could be my career. Because when you're at university, a lot of people, they're, talking about grad jobs and grad schemes, and you don't really think of actually self-employment often as a career path, even though, my granddad was a plumber, self-employed, my stepdad's a barber, self-employed, but it still hadn't really crossed my mind. So it sort of happened by accident, really, how I sort of stumbled into that. But I guess all the kind of parts were there. If you look back on it, having family who sort of worked for themselves and having always had a passion for creating content. So I guess it was sort of destined in that way.
So I mean, there's often parental pressure at that point, even if you had grandparents who were sort of self-employed. Were there people sort of in your sort of immediate family, though, who were saying, well, why don't you go and get a proper job, Kelly? I mean, why do you want to be sort of self-employed? Or did it not work like that? Did you try and look for a kind of the proper job, as they say? Or did people say, yeah, okay, that seems like you want to do, that's fine?
I guess my family have always been really supportive of me and known that I've been a very independent person. I think when I came back to the UK, I did have it in my head that I was going to get a job, but I had never really had a sort of an idea of what I wanted to do, which is why I studied history at university, because it gave me 3 years to work out what I was going to do next. And because the freelancing had gone really well, sort of before it became a sort of a serious career choice, I was looking at jobs and sort of looking at options around and about. And I quickly realized that actually I was probably earning about the same doing my freelance work as I would in a grad job, or, sort of in a junior role. So I think then it became more of a decision of, is this going to give me the job security that I need versus, getting a job and having a salary. So we kind of made a decision, my family and I, that, okay, if after the summer it's still going well and I'm still getting like a consistent stream of income, that's when I'll then decide, rather than going for a job, I'll do that. But one thing I always say to anyone that's coming at it from sort of a coming at it from the start of their career, I always kind of say, if you're thinking about doing it, like there's not really any risk. You can start as a freelancer, and then you can always, if it doesn't work out, or start a business, you can always go to an employer and that looks really good and shows initiative on your CV. Whereas I think I always had people telling me, oh, it's so brave that you started your own business, it's such a bold move. Well, it wasn't really, because I didn't have any risk. I didn't have a house and a mortgage, I didn't have a job and a stable income to leave. I was coming at it from no job, no responsibilities. And if it hadn't worked out, I could have easily walked into a job. So I do always say to young people who are, thinking of wanting to start a business or wanting to explore being freelance, like you've not really got anything to lose at that age. So it is always a good thing to explore. And yeah, for me, it just so happens that it worked out and has been my only real job since.
Yeah, but there you were. I mean, did you set up making you content just with being a freelancer in mind originally? Was that the original sort of concept, or was that after you'd been a freelancer for a while?
So it was when I decided to make that my actual career path. The only real thing that held me back in that decision making process was the fact that, okay, if I'm 21, as I was at the time, starting this now, am I going to be sat at home working by myself for the next 40 years, 50 years, whatever? And I guess what I realized was that if I wasn't going to go for, a job that was going to give me a career path and that progression, I was going to have to create that myself. So Making You Content was always set up with the idea of being a copywriting agency, or as it is now, content marketing agency, because I quickly realized that actually, okay, if you're going to go down this route, you probably don't want to just work by yourself for that whole time. You probably want to build a team and make that happen. So it was set up from the start to become an agency rather than a freelance venture. Although the first 2 years was very much me just working out what the hell I was doing in several capacities. So yeah, it did start out freelance, but then sort of quickly evolved from there.
What was it? I mean, I'm interested in that phrase. Yeah, what the hell I was doing. I mean, I can relate to that phrase completely. Sort of certainly in my first few years. I mean, what was it that surprised you about sort of setting up yourself? I mean, were there certain things that you learned? Were there harsh lessons or delightful things that you found about it?
I think being 21 and starting a business, having never worked in a job that's not hospitality or festivals or that kind of thing, there's going to be a steep learning curve. Even, for example, when I came to do my first proper tax return and my accountant was like, "Where's the receipts?" And I was like, "What receipts?" So it was some real sort of common sense lessons in the early days. And I think as well, you quickly learn that actually when you're building a team, so I think probably the most that I've learned and grown is around building a team, managing a team, motivating a team. And I think you quickly realize that every single person you deal with is their own person, and there's no silver bullet to managing people or even managing clients. And I think that was something that I'm constantly learning on still to this day. So I think, when you set out to work for yourself, I think you have that vision of, okay, I'm working for myself, I'm in control. But you don't just copy and paste yourself when you hire other people. You're bringing other people's, perspectives, other people's emotions, other people's lives into play. And I think that's probably been the biggest sort of learning curve for me, is being how you manage that while still holding on to the reasons why you set up a business for yourself and you decided to be sort of self-employed, which I think the bigger you grow is you have to get better and better at doing.
And so I'm just imagining the moment where you employ somebody for the first time, employee number two, I guess, sort of comes along. I mean, did you have to on that? Did you sort of have to make sort of quite big adjustments then? Because there must have been certain ways. Because when you're doing freelancing by yourself for a couple of years, you kind of get used to certain ways of doing things. Organizing things in certain ways, or having certain sort of processes that you go through. I mean, were there particular big sort of adjustments that you had to make in moving from one to two, and then maybe tell me a bit more about two to three and more? What specific adjustments you had to make?
Yeah, I think you have to get very good at understanding why you were good at it. Like what it is that made, making you content good as a business as opposed to Kelly Gilmour-Grassam good as a business. And trying to separate out the parts of that that are really critical and that you want everyone in the team to hold sort of, hold themselves up against, which I guess become your values really. And the bits where you realize that you do things differently to other people and embrace the differences that come with bringing other people into the mix. So, for example, my first hire, it was an amazing creative, full of ideas, but the way he communicated and the way he just was as a person was so different to me. And for some clients at first, that was quite jarring and quite a sort of they were used to working with me, and to have a very different personality put in front of them who communicated differently and who was just had different thinking. I think that was quite a shock to the system for both of me and my clients at first. But when we then started hiring, number three, number four, and so on, and we kind of quickly came to see, like, we did an exercise in probably year 3 or 4 where we were like, okay, what are our values? What unites all of us that we all believe in and that we think, is why we do good work and why we're doing well as a business. And I think when you get to that stage, which is hard to do with two people because it's trying to align just two personalities and two ways of working. But when you get past that point and you get to sort of 3, 4, 5 plus, you can then go, okay, what's brought us together? What do we all have in common? What do we believe? And this is when you start building out, your company sort of profile, what your mission, vision, values. A lot of people say, oh, you're starting a business, we've got to work on those priority number one. But I kind of disagree with that, because I think especially if you're not setting up a tech startup where you're going to go raise finance. If you're just a small business that's evolved from quite fluid routes like mine, it takes a while to figure those things out. I think it's not something you set about on day one and go, these are going to be my sort of brand values and my mission vision, because it'll change so much in those first few years. So yeah, I think it's a good thing that crystallizes quite naturally as you evolve.
And as you're evolving, of course, you've got clients, and I can imagine that you'd be really good with clients in terms of sort of being responsive and just trying to understand quite what they're trying to do. Did you have to sort of, almost like you got the raw materials of people coming on board that you have to sort of almost like train them up in terms of not just working within a team, but also working with clients, which is quite an art in itself.
Yeah, I think in the early days that was very much an organic, this is kind of what I prefer, this, or, they maybe run their emails by me, or we chat about how best to approach something. But obviously that's not scalable. So as you grow, you do have to be able to almost like document those processes and make sure that even now, as a business where we are today, we've got like a process document for onboarding a client, for example, and whether that's a retained client or a project client, and all those steps broken down that we need to make sure we follow as a business. So yeah, I think as your business matures, being able to document processes is really key, especially if you've got, you're relying on certain people in the business. So if they're off sick or someone leaves, you want to make sure that all that knowledge then doesn't go with that person that you've spent ages putting time in with. So I think it's quite a good idea when you're onboarding people, when you're taking on staff, even if you are doing that sort of, sat with them in the office informally, when you're going through those steps and thinking, like teaching someone to drive a car, actually make sure you spend that time to write it down, so that when someone else joins, you don't have to go, oh, what did we go through when they join? And it just becomes a lot easier now. If we're hiring someone, for example, or we're onboarding a client, it's quite easy for us now because we know we've done it so many times and repeated that process, and we've got it written down, that we don't have to think. But in the early days, every time you hired, it was right, what do we need to do with this person? And or you'd forget something, and 4 weeks in you'd go, oh, I never told you about that, did I? And so it becomes a bit of a random exercise whether they do really well or not based on what you remember to do at that time. So yeah, I definitely think that's important when you sort of grow the business.
And in the process of doing that, you're obviously evolving yourself as a leader as well as somebody who's sort of part of the team. How has your role changed? And is that there's always a danger. A lot of founders say, I grew the team, but it started to take me away from the things that I love doing and so on. Did you kind of go through that phase where actually there were, maybe it was the writing or maybe it was something else where you thought, well, actually, I'm not doing enough of what I originally got in this to do. Did you kind of have a bit of a growing pain yourself?
I know a lot of people who have gone through that growth pain, and some people have got over it, and other people have just decided to go back to doing it themselves. I'm quite fortunate in that I moved away from writing as the team got bigger. I might sort of throw my hand in with some perspective on a piece, when I'm working with the team, but I don't really sit and write anything from scratch nowadays, quite rarely. And I was quite fortunate that as my role moved more to kind of, working on the strategy with clients, kind of thinking big picture about the direction for NYC, being that kind of leader and, making sure I'm motivating and inspiring people. I really fell in love with all of that side of the business. So I was quite fortunate that I didn't really have that problem. I guess because, in the early days, I would get up at 7 a.m. and be writing till 7 p.m. and wouldn't stop or give myself a break. I think there's probably a reason why I didn't mind when I moved away from the writing, because I was quite a harsh boss on myself before I built that team.
Right. Okay. And so it sounds like you made that evolution, fairly naturally, or at least over a sort of a period of time, which a lot of people do really struggle with. Does that mean that now you've kind of developed your sort of strategic antennae? So you're what are you always looking at? What the developments are in the market? What's coming down the track, the new business pipeline, all those sorts of things. If you're writing sort of not very often, what are the bits that you of those things that you love doing the most at the moment?
Yeah, I think probably if you could kind of distill my role down into a few hats now, there's probably the sort of strategic and creative lead for clients. There's probably the people person, the HR person, making sure that everyone's okay, checking in with them, making sure that we're having regular one-to-ones, that side of things. There's the sales person who's going out winning new business, working alongside our client services to grow accounts. I think probably what I enjoy the most is the strategic side with clients and sort of really sitting down, doing workshops with them and getting under the skin of their business to understand the challenges their business faces and sort of how content marketing can solve those.
Mm.
But probably the thing I've struggled to let go of the most is the people person bit, because I think the reason why we've done so well over time is because we do give a shit, or I do give a shit. And I think, you don't really want to just satellite in a HR person and it kind of lose that sincerity that I think has got you to where you are and has made people stay. So that's probably, I wouldn't say that's the bit I enjoy the most, because a lot of the things that keep me up at night are people related. Is everyone okay? Like, how are they? Or they were quiet this week. What's going on with them? But it's probably the bit that I care the most about, if you get me.
Yeah, but also it's the thing that makes the business, tick at the end of the day. Is if you're taking care of the people, then the business is many respects is taking care of itself. I mean, what's the thing you've found most difficult in terms of, have there been periods of time in that growth or, where, because I mean, the entrepreneurial journey is not a smooth one, I mean, have there been bits where you felt, God, I really feel this is a challenge at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, last year was undoubtedly that year for me. It was quite a tough year, I think, for a lot of people, a lot of businesses. I think sort of obviously going into recession, which obviously only was made official at the start of this year, but was very much happening
We all
last
knew
year. We all
it.
knew it. And we had one of our biggest clients, a tech company. Tech companies particularly struggled with fundraising last year. They went under, they owed us over 40 grand. We got hacked a few weeks later. And, a few months after that, we had to make a redundancy because of sort of, I guess, slow down in the economy. And I guess the kind of feeling like you're being hit from all angles in that way of having to, I've never had to let anyone go before. And I'd always hoped that I never would have had to. We'd just had sort of upwards growth or, very secure in our income in our revenue, and we'd never had like a security threat either. So having it that from sort of the client side, the tech side, the team side, it just felt like last year really got on top of me, and it took a good few months really to sort of pull myself out of that hole. Because yeah, unfortunately, when you are the founder, you can't just, shut your laptop at 6 o'clock and forget about it. It is with you, like it's ever present. So yeah, that was a real tough period. But the thing I would say about that is just make sure you're surrounding yourself with the right people, whether that's family and friends who will give you sort of the perspective of, you need to look after your health, businesses and everything, versus the people who are in your boat, have a business, and they know that business is pretty much everything. And you've got to have that variety of support network around you, because you've got to have the people that tell you to just keep going and keep plodding on, and the people that tell you that you've got to take a break, take a day off as well. So it's good to have that network. And I think, that helped me come out the other side and sort of stay resilient.
I mean, and that was the word I was going to ask you about, actually, was resilience. Is that, I mean, did you discover a kind of level of resilience in yourself that maybe you didn't know was in there lurking?
100%, because I think in the past, I'd always found that when the business was struggling, I found that I would become sort of, my mood would be very up and down, and it would affect everyone around me. Like, I could be, especially when I was younger and I was like, girl in my early 20s, it wasn't the best mix when you were stressed at work. It would really sort of create this tornado effect around you. And I think kind of last year, at sort of the age of 30, dealing with probably way worse challenges than what I dealt with before, even though I did, feel I was in quite a hole and did struggle with that, I did find that I was able to still turn up for the team. I was still able to, turn up for my friends and family. And while they were supporting me a lot of the time and helping me through that, I don't feel like I was probably anywhere near as unbearable as I might have been in the past. So I think it's just you're learning to regulate those emotions and manage those stresses, even if it does mean that you have to kind of take your foot off the gas in terms of like socializing a bit and actually prioritizing self-care. Whereas maybe when I was 25 and that's kind of stuff would be happening, I'd just go out and get drunk and, sort of deal with it that way. So I think knowing how to deal with tough times and look after yourself while also making sure that you're looking after the business is probably how things have moved on.
Yeah, brilliant. In terms of challenges to come, I mean, you and I work in similar fields, and AI is undoubtedly one.
Yeah, I definitely think AI has made us think a lot over the past year. We've obviously seen what it can do for certain types of content creation. And I think what we tend to see now is that clients who would balk at being quoted, for a day or two or 5 days of work for a copywriting task before, they've now got something they can use instead, and they've got a tool that they can use. And I think what it's done in a way is helped people that don't really see the value of brand or copy or even now design. A lot of people are using AI for photography design. It's helped give those people a self-serving tool who might have traditionally haggled you down on price. And I think what we're seeing now is the type of work that we're getting inquiries for now is more sort of high-end content production, people wanting to really pin down their messaging. And so they see copywriting as really valuable for that. Or, for example, doing like a white paper campaign where they're really wanting to be thought leaders rather than, we've got 50 pages of content that we need to build. It's all just keyword based and we're just changing the location for each one, but it needs to be unique copy. We're not really seeing those kind of inquiries come through anymore because people can just do that using AI. What we are kind of looking at as a business is how we can kind of incorporate more editing for that, because obviously these tools will sort of produce content that is probably 90% of the way there, but usually it needs sort of that human touch, either just from a quality check perspective, making sure that, it's not thrown out any sort of weird anomalies, or even just making sure that it's polished to suit your brand. So that's something we're definitely looking to push more, because we've always, as a business, had copywriters and editors because we think they're two very separate jobs. So I think looking at how we can sort of utilize that and leverage that, I think will be kind of the direction that we take moving forwards.
I'm very relieved to hear you say that, Kelly, because that's been more or less my conclusion as well. So it's been much more about, less about generating copy, but it's been an accelerant of the work that we do, in terms of, thought, idea creation, generating ideas. And with clients, yes, you're right. There's a certain there's less of the kind of writing it from scratch. There's a lot more editorial advice, and strategy, and also an assessment of what we think of their content. So I totally on board with you. Looking back now, I mean, you set up Making You Content, was it about 10 years ago now? Was it something like that?
Next month. Next
month. Oh, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm expecting to see a big splash in social media then about the 10th anniversary. So it's a good moment to look back then. And what do you look now? You are looking back. What would you say is the sort of biggest few lessons that you've learned about yourself and running a business?
So lots of lessons. It's a bit hard to pick from them, but I think being agile is really critical. And I think sort of the ability to kind of think on our feet and adapt to challenges has helped us probably get as far as we have. So I think that's really critical. And in kind of sort of the looking at that, thinking about actually if a challenge is presented to you, could that be an opportunity? And trying to always flip things to think, what's the opportunity here? Some of the worst things that have happened to us as a business, at the time I thought the world was ending, and then actually it's worked out really well because of things that have happened after that I didn't know were going to happen. So there's a little bit of kind of, I guess, a sort of philosophy there. But also, I guess, just making sure that you're constantly staying curious. I think, it's very easy to think that, being in business 10 years, you've learned everything that you're going to learn. And then you might just have one coffee with someone where they throw you a perspective that you've not thought of. And that can completely just change the direction of what you're doing. We have an external board that we've brought in, which was through Be the Business, which is a sort of funded program. And at first we were a bit like, do we need this? We've done mentoring, we've had lots of support over the past, I feel like we've got to a really good place. And then they've actually thrown so many sort of questions at us and ideas that have just really kind of given us that new energy. So I think making sure you're surrounding yourself with people, whether it's formally in like an external board or just informally. I have lots of friends that have businesses and I speak to them about the challenges that I'm facing all the time. Just making sure you've got those people that are going to help you keep growing, either in terms of your subject matter knowledge or running a business.
Okay. And a similar question, but not quite the same, is that if you were talking to the you of, say, 10 years ago, what advice would you be giving, maybe about a few of the early decisions that you made in your business where you said you weren't really quite sure what you were doing for the first couple of years?
I guess probably I would tell myself to worry less because I have spent a lot of the past 10 years worrying and fretting over little things, and actually these things have usually worked out. So I'd probably tell myself to fret less and just enjoy the journey a bit more, which I think now I've come to realize that you have to do, because if you didn't do this and then you went and got a job and worked for someone else, you'd have probably just as much stress and worry on your plate, but it wouldn't be kind of your worry and your baby. And I think you've got to remember that we're in a very privileged position to run a business. And while it does come with its hardships and most people will never understand just how hard it is, it's also one of the most fortunate positions that you can be in to kind of have that opportunity to build something of your own. So yeah, that's probably my advice to my younger self.
Now, I love how strong Kelly is when talking about the people side of things. Unlike many people who grow their business, she quickly recognised that she couldn't just copy and paste herself, as she puts it, when recruiting others. And she understood the need to document processes in the business as you go along. And even though last year was tough for her, she found that higher level of resilience when lots of things went wrong at the same time. And she was able to pull herself and others through it all. I also think her business lessons are great. Being agile and thinking on your feet is easier said than done, of course. And then there's constantly staying curious and worrying less. And I can really relate to that last one in particular. And as Kelly rightly says, running a business can be hard, but sometimes we have to stop and remember that it is also really a privilege. So thank you to Kelly, and thank you to you too for tuning in. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate and review through your usual podcast provider. And if you want to find out more about the Merri-Cast or our business Merri-Board Media, you can find us on LinkedIn. Don't forget to join us for our next episode, but until then, thanks for listening.